I honour the first Australians on whose lands we meet and whose cultures we celebrate as the oldest continuing cultures in human history. I acknowledge the Prime Minister, Ministers and Members of the Parliament, past and present, gathered in the Great Hall today. And I pay tribute to the venerable and irrepressible Michael McLeod from Message Stick and all the staff who support this gathering here, commemorating the 18th anniversary of the National Apology. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. There are still a few things going on here in Washington these days, and I don't resume my life as a free-range chicken for another month or so. One of the great wisdoms of our Aboriginal brothers and sisters is to teach us that according to the Dreamtime, time itself is of little linear consequence. Because according to the Dreamtime, we live in an eternity of time and space. It was we in the Western world and through Western modernity that decided instead to draw lines and squares around these eternal things, as well as carving out chasms between human beings and the rest of the created order, including animals, plants, and indeed the earth itself. Aboriginal deep history, by contrast, and the great mysteries it embraces, bears many resemblances to ancient Abrahamic traditions on the origins of our universe and of all things. Indeed, we all have much more in common than we think. Despite all of this, I still find myself to be very much a creature of time and space, where we meticulously count the days, the months, and the decades. And when I think of this day as the 18th anniversary of the delivery of the apology in the House of Representatives, I know that 18 years is a very long time for most of us. Even though in the depths of the Dreamtime, it is nothing but a fragment of collective memory, delivered through songlines going back some 65,000 years. I remember clearly, as if it was only yesterday, that morning of the apology. Therese and I had greeted Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders from across the country at the ceremonial entrance outside the Prime Minister's office in the ministerial wing of the building. There were many tears shed that morning. I remember one elderly Aboriginal woman hugging me, heaving tears of relief, still not believing that the apology was actually going to happen. And after I kissed her on the cheek, she said to me that was the first kiss she'd ever received from a white fella. I've never forgotten that, and all the racist brutality that her simple message conveyed. There was a lot of talking that morning, as each person unburdened themselves of the hurts, pains and indignities that this proud people had suffered over the previous 200 years. The problem for me was I hadn't quite finished writing the apology by then. We'd had a few things on that week, including an attempted military coup in East Timor. And I was due to be on my feet delivering this speech, the apology, barely an hour and a half later. I remember clearly Albo, then as Leader of the House, coming into the Prime Minister's office barely 15 minutes before proceedings were to commence, only to find me huddled over a word processor with a staffer at the keyboard as we worked through the last lines of the apology. Albo's response always stays with me in my mind. "Bugger me," he said, "you really cut it close." I said, "It'll be fine, I just needed another 10 minutes. And then, as we walked into the chamber together, myself flipping through the pages of the text to make sure there weren't any blank pages in the middle. While I had spent much of the week working on it and many months thinking about it, the apology, or at least its final formal text, was a bit of a near-run thing that day. I wanted to make sure that every single word of it, as the Prime Minister of the country, representing the people of Australia there assembled, that every one of those words was authentically mine. The thing about the Australian people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, is that they are very, very good at spotting a fraud at 100 paces. And it's been a very long time since the first beginnings of what became the reconciliation movement, going way back to the 1967 referendum. Aboriginal leaders told me afterwards that they feared being dudded again. And I was determined not to do that. Of course, saying you're sorry is one thing, although, as it turned out, saying sorry was the hardest thing of all for many people to do. But it's something else again to turn the words of the apology into real things that matter in changing people's lives. And this has become the continuing moral test for us all. That's where closing the gap comes in, to give us an annual reckoning based on our progress or regress in the hard scrabble of education, health, employment and housing outcomes, and in the rates of incarceration. It's been a long road these last 18 years, and it's true, there have been failures and successes along the way through. We are tempted often just to focus on our failures. In some respects, that's our normal human nature at work. But it's not good for the country nor for Aboriginal people just to do that. When I look around the country at what's happened over the period of time, I see, for example, great institutional innovations committed to the practical business of reconciliation. I think, for example, of Jared Neesham and the remarkable work of the Clontarf Foundation, building a bridge between Aboriginal communities, the fun of competitive football, and through that finding apprenticeships and other pathways to real-world job opportunities. And I also think of the work of the Australian Indigenous Education Foundation, led by Andrew Penfold. Andrew would normally be with us today. He's a regular. He's been for the last 18 years because the practical business of reconciliation through educational opportunity has been his core focus. But as many of you know, Andrew suffered a stroke a few weeks ago, and although he's recovering well, he won't be back at work for a little while yet. He's asked me to send all of you his absolute best this morning. Back in 2008, I agreed with Andrew that the government would invest an initial $20 million in AIEF in responding to community demand for Indigenous facilities choosing to enrol their children in the best private boarding schools in the country. I did so on the condition that Andrew go out and find $20 million from the private sector as well. He promptly did that, and a lot more besides. Since then, it has grown vastly in its scope. The AIEF now supports over 1,500 students and alums each year. Its graduates come from over 400 local communities in every state and territory of Australia. Almost half of all AIEF scholarship students come from remote and very remote local communities. Of these, 1 in 3 are now back working or studying in their home communities. And of this 1,500 young Aboriginal leaders, 97% are now employed, studying, or engaged in other community work. They are young people like Leon from Broome in WA, who completed Year 12 at Wesley College in South Perth in 2023. Leon now works at the Broome Regional Aboriginal Medical Service as an Aboriginal health practitioner, delivering frontline care back in the community that raised him. They include Cody from La Perouse in Sydney, who completed Year 12 at St Vincent's College, Potts Point in 2022. Cody is the founder of a social enterprise protecting and promoting Aboriginal culture. She also works as a senior policy officer at the New South Wales Aboriginal Education Consultative Group. They include Wyatt from Gatton in Queensland, go Queensland, who graduated from Ipswich Grammar School in 2015, again on an AIEF scholarship. Today, Wyatt is an associate at the global law firm Jones Day, and he has now joined the AIEF board, bringing serious expertise from the legal community and the business community into the practical work of Indigenous education and opportunity. This was all because of the vision and the activism of Andrew Penfold, the bloke I first met on the day of the apology 18 years ago. From little things, big things grow. I pay tribute to the work of Andrew and the work that continues to this day. I thank the Australian government, the Australian business community, and some of Australia's best private schools for getting behind this vital initiative. Of course, the hard business of reconciliation goes on, and regrettably, not all support it. On the 26th of January, we barely avoided a mass casualty in Perth. That act of white supremacist terrorism was intended to massacre countless Indigenous men, women and children who were out peacefully on the streets of Perth. It was an outrageous assault, not only on them, but their non-Indigenous supporters, and the right of all citizens to protest peacefully. And it comes as our nation is still grieving for the victims and reeling from what happened on Bondi Beach in Sydney in December, the most deadly, politically motivated terrorist attack against our Jewish brothers and sisters we have seen. There has long been a bond between Indigenous Australians and Jewish Australians, as both have experienced the indignity of racism on our shores. Many of you would know the story of Australians like Jim Spiegelman, who later became Chief Justice of New South Wales. The son of Holocaust survivors, he put his body on the line to expose racial segregation by organising, with Charlie Perkins, the Great Freedom Riot of 1965. Then there is a much older story of William Cooper, a proud Aboriginal elder, which has particular resonance at this moment. Some of you will know about the Evian Conference in France in 1938. At that meeting, we, as Australia, joined the other nations of the world in discussing the Jewish problem. We closed our hearts and we turned our backs on Jewish refugees fleeing the murderous white supremacists of Nazi Germany. William Cooper wasn't among our delegates at Evian because he was a man who had no rights to citizenship within his own country. He had been born in 1861, spent his youth in enforced labour, and had barely 7 months of formal education. When the Kristallnacht pogroms erupted across Germany in November of 1938, William Cooper began gathering signatures from fellow Aboriginals around the country for a petition excoriating Germany's persecution of the Jews. I try to imagine in my mind's eye the reactions of the German consulate officials as William Cooper led his protest down Collins Street to their offices to present his petition. I told this story in a speech when I was Australian Foreign Minister at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, back in 2010. We had gathered there with William Cooper's descendants to honour his memory. Cooper's is an important story in our national history, and it is one that bears repeating. We must never heed the call of those who seek to dehumanise and divide. Racism is not simply harmful, it is also unpatriotic. It is not who we are as a people. What happened at Bondi was indescribably evil. What happened on the 26th of January in Perth was also evil, even though the bomb did not go off. Many of our Indigenous sisters and brothers now question whether it is safe to exercise their democratic right to assemble in public, just as Jewish Australians are deeply anxious for their safety. So on this 18th anniversary of the apology, let us all, whatever our political beliefs, whatever our political affiliations might be, commit afresh to our great and continuing mission of reconciliation for all. In things essential, unity. In things non-essential, diversity. And in all things, the deepest respect for one another. And it is in that spirit that together we will indeed advance Australia.